Thank you for being here this morning. It is a joy to have you at Stoneshill Community Church. In case you didn't know, I'm Pastor Joey, and I am trying to grow a beard. So any encouragement that you could provide would be appreciated. Okay. All right. It's not a real hearty applause, but there's enough of you that's okay. I was thinking this week how that when I was a kid, and I had a few older brothers. And my oldest brother, Randy, took special delight in letting his beard grow for 2 or 3 days. And then he would catch me, maybe with my shirt off or maybe just, catch me around the house. And he would give me what he called a whisker burn. Have you ever had a whisker burn? Okay, where your older brother gets you and he takes that chin of his and he sinks it in your armpit. And you squeal, or he puts it in your eye socket, and you squeal, okay? I decided I would carry the tradition on with my kids. And so I had a lot of joy, and I was thinking about this morning how that if they were still little, I could give a really major whisker burn if I wanted to, couldn't I? I'd be set up for that. I kind of mentioned that to Levi, and he looked at me and said, that's not going to happen. So he's a little bigger now. He's going to fend for himself. Oh, it's great to have you here. It really is. I want to say thank you. You were kind over the month of October. Some of you gave cards and offered words of encouragement and gifts and tokens and gestures of appreciation. So on behalf of not just myself, but everybody who serves here at Stoneshill, I want to say thank you for your kindness in that way. It means a lot to us. And so thank you. We do feel your love and appreciate Stoneshill Community Church. This is our home now. This is our home. People ask me where I'm from. Well, I've getting to the point where I've spent more of my life in Indiana than I've spent anywhere else. And that's pretty major. We're not quite there yet, but we're getting there. So living somewhere in Indiana since 1997. So Indiana's kind of becoming our home. So thank you. And if you're looking for a church home or family, thank you for being here. And we want you to come back. We're in a series, and part of what we do in a series is we do book preaching. And in book preaching, sometimes we tackle pretty major books. I mean, these are not easy expositions to work through week after week, making it relevant, explaining it, being faithful to the meaning, interpretation of the text, applying it to your life. These are challenging things to do. And so, but we don't shy away from the challenge. We take it on, and I really don't know of a more relevant book for our day and time than the book of Judges. We so desperately need heroes to rise. And I'm going to be talking to you about that today. What we also will do, and I'll just kind of give you a heads up for next week, we're going to be honoring all military personnel since it's related to Veterans Day. So if you have a friend or family member that served in the military or currently serving, and they can come, then bring them with you. Unlike maybe other services, I'm going to really nail the patriotic theme. Okay? Sometimes people have a problem with saying the pledge and singing the national anthem, and it's kind of always a puzzle to me because, when we sing songs to our wives or our husbands, we don't say, we belong to the kingdom of God. We never express love like that. Come on. You never express love and appreciation and gratitude for a nation that allows you to meet like this? What's your problem? What's the deal? So always an inconsistency for me. So next week we're going to marry it, and I'm going to show you and demonstrate to you not only how patriotism is still okay, it's still right, it's still good, but I will show you too how that, especially in light of some of the themes we have here in the book of Judges, the military plays a very prominent role in this book. And so next week I'll talk to you a little bit about Christians in the military. I'll share a little bit about just war theory and how that it is right at times for Christians to take up arms. And this is no argument that I'm trying to make for people to be violent. I'm just saying there are those seasons of history especially in generational decline and world instability, where Christians have to rise up and do the right thing, and that is stand up for those who are being taken advantage of. And so, and also fighting for your homes and your families and for what's right. So I'm going to marry those ideas next week. I'm very patriotic, and also I will share this. Next week there will be an unveiling of a one-of-a-kind painting by an exciting new artist that's somewhat local to us here. I will have it here next week, and we'll have it and we'll unveil it. It's one of a kind, only one exists in the world, and it's made by an exciting new artist here that's connected with Stoneshill Community Church and Indiana Wesleyan University. So you'll get to see that next week. So bring your friends, bring your family. We're going to celebrate the goodness of God and the grace of God, because I believe He has a special purpose for America. And I really believe that America is still the place where heroes can be incubated, families can raise up heroes, men and women who will rise up in a what is coming to be understood as a postmodern, or we could say a spiritual dark age, a time when tolerance is the virtue, is the identifying word or characteristic of our era or age. It's a time when truth is not really something that's championed by anybody anymore, because nobody can be right, so why be passionate about anything? So we are living in that time. So the book of Judges is relevant because it shows us, if we keep persisting and pushing into that worldview, how life and society is going to eventually resolve. And it doesn't look very, very pretty when you look at it that way. I believe in love. I believe in grace. I believe in the gospel, the kingdom of God, and our ultimate allegiance to the kingdom. I believe in that, but it is not inconsistent with saying, thank you, God, for this great land and for this nation that you have made. Thank you for the idea that we can have elections. Thank you for the idea that we can have peaceful transfers of power. I mean, where do you get that? Where else do you get that in the world? Where you can have peaceful transfers of power and elections happen and you have a voice. Incredible how this has all been set up and how God has used this place. And so, again, next week, come be a part of that. You don't want to miss it. Tom Leach and some of his helpers will be also presenting on on some special things for that day. And we'll have some special guests. So be here next week. Spiritual Dark Ages, A Hero Must Rise, a subtitle for our theme here this morning. We're going to call it Generational Decline. Generational decline. I want you to work that phrase in your head. Let that stick for a bit. And as we work our way through this, you're going to see a little bit more about what I'm talking about. I was intrigued. Several years ago, Tom Brokaw wrote a book called The Greatest Generation. Okay? And it describes the virtues of the World War II generation. And it's saying a lot when you say that this generation was the greatest generation. In fact, you're kind of bypassing the American founding generation. You're kind of bypassing the Civil War generation when you say that the World War II generation was the greatest generation. And I just want to say, as much as I love World War II movies and stories, I don't necessarily buy the thesis that the World War II generation was the greatest generation. But I hasten to say, listen closely, I do think, in a sense, it was the last generation. And what I mean, it was the last generation, is that it was the last generation to embrace this external code of traditional morality. This generation's great failure, as it is turning out, is that it has been unable to inculcate this moral code in its children. And thus the frugal, self-disciplined, deferred gratification generation of World War II produced the spoiled children of the 60s and the Woodstock generation. And so from the American founding until World War II, there was a widespread belief that there is a moral order in the universe that makes a claim on each of us. And this moral order generated some very clear social norms. And that's why, even though I did not live in the World War II generation, and like I said, I watch movies, read stories about it, and if I'm going to watch any war movie, people will tell you that really know me well that I prefer World War II stories. Because I love the patriotism, the sense of honoring God, these norms that were communicated just through the culture. I mean, you went to church, you were faithful to your spouse, you supported your children when your country called. You didn't banter back and forth in your mind, should I be patriotic and go or should I not? No, these guys signed up, they were ready. And when the world was in an upheaval, of course you have a few here and there that didn't want to go, but for the most part, you had men fighting in the war, and they had pictures of their husbands and fathers hanging on the refrigerator. And even though many of them did not come home, there was a sense of patriotism in the hearts of America. We understand a duty is called. A sacrifice must be made. And if you ever doubt the resolve of the American people to love and to sacrifice and to fight for their families, just look at the memorials in our land. And they are reminders of the ultimate price that people have paid. But we don't have that anymore. Yes, there's patriotism. But we don't have this sense of this World War II values of a generation. Not maybe the greatest generation, but it's the last generation when we see these values lived out nearly by everybody. And now I watched a documentary this week about 4 college guys that go around the United States asking different people about their belief in Jesus and such. And they actually stopped by the Mount Rushmore. And then they visited Boston and some other places, maybe the Washington Monument in D.C. And what they said, I mean, these are Christian guys. And I realize we're in trouble as a generation when they said memorials are kind of dumb. What did he just say? Memorials are kind of dumb. You know, we're just folks about Jesus. And I guarantee you there's probably a revisionist textbook been written somewhere where many of the heroes of our past are made out to be criminals. Because we're revisioning the story. Okay? And so I love young people. I love college kids. I love the fact that God is going to raise up young people here in our church family to do some incredible things. And we're going to emphasize how you can be heroic in so many different areas of life. But this generation, where truth is relative, and if there is truth, and there's nothing really worth getting excited about, there's some core staples, values that are so essential to who we are as America, and they're being compromised and now being revised in such a way that memorials are quote-unquote dumb. What is wrong with this generation? I'm just scratching my head. And today, due to many factors, and while there are still many moral people in the world, don't misunderstand, that World War II generation, the moral consensus they provided is now deteriorated. It's gone. And so when I talk about termites in the floor, that's a very good illustration. In fact, how many of you were alive, say in the 1945, 1950 range? Okay, just put your hand up. Yes. Praise God. Okay. And do we have anybody here that is like a grandparent, and then you have a parent, and then you have a grandchild? Okay, you've got 3 generations here. Do we have anybody you have 3 generations present in your family? You have them here this morning. Just stand to your feet. Stand to your feet if you don't mind. If you've got 3 generations, yes. Yes. Look at this. 3 generations right here at Stoneshill Community Church. Isn't that great? I love that. Thank you. Thank you for coming. Thank you for being here. It's so important. And what we're going to be talking about today in our text is we're going to be looking at what happens when there's generational decline, where maybe you have a parent, or let's just say one generation, which a parent that really had a vibrant walk with the Lord, and then maybe what happens is after that vibrant walk with the Lord, maybe it doesn't get transferred to the next generation, and so it kind of the spiritual life kind of gets religion based and formalized, and so there's some disconnection by the second generation, and then what happens in the third generation is that there's just complete apathy. Who cares? Oh, I've heard that before. And that's what we see in the book of Judges, and it's also what we're seeing. The bill is coming due on some of the things that we have neglected generationally to pass down and to transfer. And I'm glad that we have those 3 generations, those 4, 5 families here with 3 generations here this morning, because you're endeavoring to make the transfer. You're endeavoring to get it communicated. And I praise God for your commitment in that way. But there is a new morality today. Termites in the floor have eaten away until there's nearly 1.5 million, not quite this year, I don't think, but like 1,250,000 or so abortions a year. Did you know that? Abortion on demand. Okay, we're not just talking about medical reasons. People don't want a baby and they go abort it. Okay, nearly 1.5 million a year. Did you know that several states, but like 6 states now, are aggressively pursuing full recognition and approval of gay marriage? Did you know that? This is the trend. There is a promotion of sexual depravity via the internet. This is a trend. Marriage and family are optional. This is a trend. The feminization of men is a trend. Young people addicted to social media such that they can't sustain conversation or thinking about the deeper questions of life. This is a shift. This is termites in the floor from that World War II. Maybe not the greatest generation, but the last generation. They understood some basic stuff, and it got transferred, and it was it impacted their second generation, but it's getting lost. And so today, I was born in 1968, and I was raised on Andy Griffith, and hey. There's a guy here that can do a wonderful rendition of Ernest T. Bass's song on the Andy Griffith Show, and maybe someday I'll get him to do it for us. But the values and they've even used Andy Griffith in churches as Bible studies. Did you know that? It's incredible, the values that were interwoven. Now we've got Sex in the City. This is what's happening in generational decline. If you watch TV, the predominant message that you get, here it is. I'll summarize. Of course there are exceptions, and I know I'm not anti-TV. You just got to understand worldview stuff. So I'm always looking for worldview when I watch a TV program, when I watch movies, when I listen to politicians in debates and give these wonderful renditions of rhetoric. When I listen to all of that, I'm thinking worldview. What are your underlying assumptions for why you believe what you believe, and how does that carry out and transfer, and what impact is that going to have on the next generation? And I honestly am deeply concerned, not because it's a political thing, but I am concerned about the underlying assumptions of certain political candidates and how those are going to play out down the road. And that's what we've got to look at. And see, the moral consensus is gone. That World War II, that last generation where a moral consensus was agreed upon, it's now gone. And I don't want to romanticize the era too much, because of course there were problems, but you understand this moral consensus that rolled out in waves and waves and waves from little small town communities throughout America. This was a patriotic country. It was a God-honoring, God-fearing country for the most part. Obviously some issues, but it had that underlying moral consensus. And now when you encounter media, and when you encounter politicians who talk, and when you encounter movies and you encounter books, in fact, there's a very disturbing book that is being read by a number of leaders. Put up that just real quickly. Fareed Zakaria is the slide. You guys don't know this, okay? You may not be aware of this, but it's a guy, it's a picture of the book in his face. I really hadn't planned on going here. I just threw it in the slideshow. Thought I might use it, but decided against it, and now I'm actually showing this to you. There are actually books being written about the post-American world. There's a worldview, men and women, that is being promoted, that it's time for America to be humbled. It's time for America to have a smaller seat at the global table. We have dominated the world long enough. It is time for us to be like everybody else. Not exceptional, not set apart, not God-honoring. It's time for us to be humbled. We little peons who are Americans have been raised in an imperial culture. We don't understand what what it means to be a country in the world and what our role is to be in the world. We don't understand that stuff. Okay? You will find you'll be very amazed. And this is a book that people are reading around the world. They love this book because it undoes the great Satan that many, wow. That was, see what I'm telling you? You better listen up. I've got a message. I told you I got a message. I got a message this morning, so watch out. Watch out. And if that guy grows horns, we know who's up, okay? We know who's up next. You got to understand this. And this is making inroads into the political ideologies of many, many people today. You think I'm a kook. I'm not a kook. Okay? I understand this. I understand at least in a measure to the point that I try to be an informed citizen. I try to read. I try to be an informed observer of what I see. I'm trying to weigh it out. I'm trying to understand it in light of what the Bible teaches, where it's all going to go. Okay? And you got to understand this. And when we understand this ideology, and I'll let that rest for now, but when you understand this ideology and this worldview, and you begin to look and understand the assumptions behind this, what you're going to find is that all of a sudden decisions that are made makes perfect sense. Because who cares if this nation is trillions of dollars in debt? We need to be humbled anyway. Okay? It's a very dangerous ideology. Again, not political this morning. I'm worldview driven. Show me your beliefs. I'll tell you where it's going to go. And that's what the book of Judges is about. And it works on a number of fronts, not just nationally. It works individually. Show me your core beliefs, your core set of assumptions. What you really believe gets lived out. And it will take you a certain direction in your life. And so I want to say to you, based on what we see in Judges, based on what we see in generational decline in general, especially what we're going to see here as we open up the text this morning. Again, you're going to see, if you watch and encounter these books and media and so on and so forth, I'm finally going to get to this, okay? Here's what the predominant message is going to be, okay? Children are smarter than their parents. You'll see that over and over again. Homosexuals are smart, funny, good looking, they know how to dress, and they're well cultured. Watch a show. Watch The Modern Family. Watch Partners. Watch any of these, The New Norm. Watch any of these shows, and that's how the homosexual will be presented in those shows. Okay? A white person in a business suit is usually the villain. Prostitutes are portrayed favorably. Everyone does sex, but never catches a disease. Adultery is always depicted sympathetically, and the wife deserves something better anyway, and we cheer for her as she cheats on her husband on the side. If we could time warp someone from the World War II generation to today, would they recognize who we are? Would they really understand how far we have come? I think we have in front of us a very serious and weighty question this morning. Will we be a city on a hill that shines, or will we be a Gomorrah on a hill that simply continues this steady decline toward its own destruction? Lincoln has it right. I've referenced that quote so many times, and we'll reference it more. It's not so much wolves at the door, it's termites in the floor, and Lincoln understood that. And I want to say to you that it's great to be free. I love freedom fighters. I love people. I love America. But it's got to be a responsible freedom by responsible people. And when freedom runs to excess and it breeds permissiveness and license and greed and selfishness, it's no longer a sustainable freedom. Look at what happened between the World War II generation and the generation of today. Look at the moral shift. Everything has shifted. And now it's my body and it's my sloppy birth control methods. And it doesn't matter what you think about this little person growing inside. It's my choice. It's now marry who you love. And the children reared in such union struggle to understand. And it's now my money. And I'm going to spend more than I make. And if I do, it's my business, even if you end up paying for it. We can't sustain this. You can't. Forward? Are you kidding me? Forward? You can't sustain this type of trend and pattern and expect America to be what you want it to be in 20 years or 30 years. No. The wise thing to do, if you're on the wrong road, it's not forward, it's just faster to destruction. Forward means I turn around, I get on the right road, and I begin to track with God on this. I begin to track with His values. I get the value thing right. Forward? No way. No way, because that's what's happened between the World War II generation and today, and we're setting ourselves up for this another major termite in the floor generation or multiple generations that's going to just get us farther and farther and farther away. Listen, the writer of Judges has introduced us to this book called Judges by listing a few victories, but they also list many more failures and victories. And the writer of Judges has introduced us to the angel of the Lord. We've seen this in Judges 1 or Judges chapter 2. And if you missed last week, I know you were on spring break or fall break, and I hope you had a great time. Welcome back, by the way. But I want you to go back and listen to that because Jesus actually shows up in the Old Testament. And he's referenced as the angel of the Lord. And we talked about that. And he'll show up 2 more times in the book of Judges. So Jesus is embedded in this book. And this is about Jesus, okay? It's about this radical, romantic lover warrior who wants to fight on your behalf and my behalf. Listen, now he gets a bit nostalgic here in the next section of Judges chapter 2. Okay? Again, this was their world. Joshua was their World War II generation. And we could go, they went to tabernacle, they worshiped Yahweh alone, they were faithful to their spouses for the most part, they supported their children, they went when their country called. I mean, Joshua was this incredible leader. He was kind of like the Abe Lincoln of an era. God had given them the land and they walked with God. There was obedience. There was firm reliance on the Lord. And the writer of Judges gets nostalgic for these days and he flashes back to this World War II generation when life was good or seemed to be much better than it maybe was in the time of a period of the Judges writer was writing. Okay. So life was good and he flashes back and, if you don't know the book of Joshua, this little 4 or 5 verse flashback will help orient you to the book of Joshua, which is a great background for the book of Judges. On the screen, you're going to see it in Judges chapter 2, verse 6. Judges 2:6. And when Joshua had let the people go, the children of Israel went every man unto his inheritance to possess the land. Okay, so the Canaanite resistance had been broken under Joshua. Joshua basically takes this group of nomads who wandered in the wilderness, who knew how to camp out really well, but they hadn't hardly ever fought a battle in their life. And he shapes them into a mighty military team, a precise military machine. They conquer the land. They break the back of the enemy. I've addressed the so-called moral problem of the conquest. You'll need to go back and listen to that too. But he breaks the back of the enemy. And all the tribes were to go to their allotted territories, and they were to conquer locally and build homes for themselves. Verse 6. Verse 7. And the people served the Lord all the days of Joshua, and all the days of the elders that outlived Joshua, generation number 2, served the Lord, who had seen all the great works of the Lord that He did for Israel. So we can see that the patriotism runs deep here in the passage. Exodus, the miraculous crossing of the Red Sea, the Jordan River crossing, the victories in the wars of the conquest are all object lessons of God's great care. Verse 8, and Joshua the son of Nun. Sometimes somebody may walk up to you and say, who is the only man in the Bible who did not have a father? Right? Joshua the son of Nun. Okay, it's corny, but anyway, it may work for you. Think about it. Joshua the son of Nun. No, N-U-N. That was the name of his daddy. Okay, the servant of the Lord. This was what he was called after 110 years. He died being 110 years of age or old. If you live 110 years and the one thing they say about you is that you were the servant of the Lord, praise God. Praise God. What a great epitaph. What a great line to remember. What a great way to memorialize a life well lived for 110s. Are you a servant of the Lord? Man, this guy was. He was a hero, a fantastic hero that God raised up for 110 years. He was a servant of the Lord. He had this incredible legacy. And this is a guy that his life spanned these generations. The history of the Exodus, it spanned the bondage in Egypt. He was part of that generation. And he comes out of Egypt and he's in the wilderness wanderings, and he's also part of the conquest of Canaan, and he was even one of the brave spies who went ahead into the promised land. And after the death of Moses, Joshua led these mighty military campaigns which captured the heart of Canaan. Verse 9 says, "And they buried him in the border of his inheritance in Timnath-heres, in the mount of Ephraim, on the north side of the hill of Gaash." And so what's really amazing to me is 350-year time lapse has not done anything to erase the memory of this guy who was this incredible, exceptional leader. They still knew exactly where he was buried. It became a kind of memorial. And memorials are dumb? Wow. He was a hero to his generation. And his grave, like I said, it was well known. Verse 10 says, and this is really the sticking point for today. "And also all that generation were gathered under their father." So Joshua dies, generation number 1. Those who live after him, all that generation were gathered under their fathers. "And there arose another generation after them," generation number 3, "which knew not the Lord, nor yet the works which he had done for Israel." Wow. Joshua, verse 10, the elder generation, verse 7, and the third generation of verse 10. These true heroes from 2 previous generations have moved on, and everything starts to diminish for them. Values did not get transferred. They knew about the values, but they didn't know Yahweh, the God of the values. And the way this is stated, we can understand it to mean that this third generation, it wasn't so much they didn't have exposure to the information. It's just that they saw it, they were aware of it, but they refused to acknowledge God. They refused to allow the previous generations, the values of the previous generations, to impact them in such a way, a personal way, that they would actually live these values out in their lives. They did not know Yahweh. He was mighty to act in their behalf, but see, they got away from it. See, Joshua had been in bondage. He knew what it was like to be enslaved. He knew what it was like to wander for 40 years. He knew what it was like to spy out the land, and everybody else, the other Joshua and Caleb were ready to take it, but the other 10 spies said, "No, we can't do it. They're too big." And as a result, they're disobedient. They have 40 more additional years in the wilderness to wander. He had been through that. He knew he had to have the Lord. And friends, you got to have the Lord. Our nation has to have the Lord in this time. There's too much at stake. And see, this is a guy who understands this. And so he makes sure that he leads the people toward the Lord because he's been through this stuff. And now there's a second generation that kind of knows about it. And now there's a third generation that it's like, oh, whatever. Memorials are dumb. They've lost the meaning of freedom. They've lost the meaning of values that would secure that freedom. And so they learn to live with complacency. And there are no Joshuas rising up. This third generation syndrome, it's a lukewarmness and apathy about amazing spiritual things by a group of people who respond with a whatever attitude to the sacrifices that have been made. The parent's spiritual fervor becomes the child's formalistic religion and the grandchild's apathy. This is the plight of the third generation. The third generation was satisfied to do life their way. They didn't really know the cost of sacrifices made. They didn't have Joshua's vision for a land that would honor God all throughout the land, in every tribe and every part of that land. The third generation was not going to personalize their walk with God. They were not going to have those values as a part of their lives. And God's dramatic preservation and care for their nation was going to slip into oblivion. And today we call it tolerance. A key word for a third generation era. It's tolerance. What do we read in chapter 1? They didn't drive them out. They tolerated, they intermarried. They went ahead and just began to shift their values in light of what culture and society had determined that they should be. And in our day, few heroes are rising up to stem the rising tide of rebellion and brokenness of a lost generation. And the reason heroes are not rising is because we have valued the wrong things. And that generation, this third generation group, they have seen it, and they have seen our idolatry. And we have failed to create wholesome home environments. And so therefore they're skeptical of marriage and willing to slip and slide with redefinitions of the same. And we have failed to demonstrate how and why Christianity is true. And so now others are opting for alternative worldviews. And in all honesty, I feel like C.S. Lewis, we have no right to complain. Where are all the heroes? How come no one is rising up to lead? Why is it that things are going in such a negative direction? I think C.S. Lewis has it right. And he says, we castrate and bid the gelding be fruitful. And a gelding cannot reproduce or be fruitful. They've been castrated. And neither can this generation, a third generation, whose values have been castrated out from underneath them. I don't want to be too graphic there. Okay? They've been cut off from their values. And we laugh at values. We laugh at the values of that World War II last generation. It's a funny way to live, right? And we laugh at those values today. And society satisfies the demands of its citizens by liberating us from traditional morality to gratify our senses. And so we have no room to complain. We have castrated our heroes. And now we say, why aren't you heroic? We have set ourselves up to do what Lincoln says, to commit a kind of cultural suicide. You know, this summer I kept hearing a song with a very memorable sound. I've mentioned this to you already in a previous message, but we didn't actually watch a part of the clip anyway, and maybe we'll do that today. Someone suggested that this song I kept hearing this summer, it's called We Are Young by the band called Fun. Someone suggested it actually could work as a theme or anthem for the Olympics. And the chorus says, we are young, so let's set the world on fire. We can burn brighter than the sun. And the rest of the lyrics, though, are definitely disturbing, to say the least, because it says, my friends are in the bathroom getting higher than the Empire State. And if by the time the bar closes, you feel like falling down, I'll carry you home tonight. And that's what setting the world on fire means. You see, Scottish writer and politician Andrew Fletcher was right when he said, listen closely to me now. If a man were permitted to write the ballads of a nation, he need not care who write its laws. You can write laws, legislate all day long, but it's the people who write the ballads. They capture the philosophy of a generation. They get poetic with it. They lyricize over it. They capture it in catchy phrases, and it becomes a hot selling point. And Rolling Stone even suggests that it's the performance of We Are Young was the defining sing-along moment of one of the largest music festivals that they had over the summer of 2012. What's going on? It's a generation that rises up, and they relate to this kind of a worldview worldview and a world philosophy. We just watched the clip, if you would. We got the clip ready, guys. Can we run that clip? And this summer, when I heard it, like, you know, if I'm dialing through and I hear that song, it's like, oh, I turn that up. I like that song. And then I got to listening to it. It's like, wait a second. What you're telling me, get drunk, get high, but no, there's no worries necessarily mentioned in the song about waking up tomorrow with a pregnant girlfriend. There's nothing talked about a drug habit. There's nothing that talks about, you know, being unable to hold down a job because you party all the time. Okay? This sort of postmodern fantasy that ideas don't have consequences dangerously resonates in the minds and hearts of young people, and all of our hearts and minds, really. But the immorality is only part of the problem, and the lack of purpose, it's only part of the problem. The celebrated drunken bar scene is only part of the problem. It's not what bothers me most about We Are Young. What is most troubling, listen to me, is how this lifestyle is portrayed as not even really all that meaningful, but as all that is left because there's nothing significant to live for. The prevailing worldview of today says we have no author, we're not accountable to anyone, there are no ideas or grand stories of redemption, no meta-narratives behind all that we see, no one is right about anything, don't be patriotic, don't honor God, don't get too excited about the Bible or religious things, and since we are our own, accountable to no one, we should seek all the gratification and satisfaction we can right now. This is the plight of a third generation. I read a book by an atheist, Sam Harris. He's a new atheist. And it's basically, when you hear someone talk about new atheism, it's basically atheism with an attitude. And I read the book, The End of Faith by Sam Harris. And he said, listen, this is from an atheist now. He understands something here. To lose the conviction that you can be right about anything seems a recipe for the end of days. Boy, he's right. Because the third generation, you can't really be right about anything. Right? And where is this going to leave the next generation? What will family look like? What will marriage look like? What will the church and patriotism and Christianity look like in this nation? If the next generation has no heroes that rise up and challenge the predominant worldview of culture, what will happen? What will it look like? Men and women, that's why we're studying the book of Judges. Because Judges is what it's going to look like. I'm reminded of Elizabeth, a true hero, and I'll take her philosophy of life over Fun's lyrics any day. Elizabeth had a dialogue with her high school teacher. And the teacher on the first day of class said, hey, I want to welcome everybody. This is the first day of class, and so I want to lay down some ground rules. First, the teacher says, since no one has the truth about morality, you should be open-minded to the opinions of your fellow students, since no one has the truth. The teacher recognizes a little hand of Elizabeth in the corner of the room, and she puts her hand up. And she said, in just asking a question, not trying to be controversial needlessly, but she just asked a question. She says in a forthright manner, if nobody has the truth, isn't that a good reason for me not to listen to my fellow students? And after all, if nobody has the truth, why should I waste my time listening to other people and their opinions? What's the point? Only if somebody has the truth does it make sense to be open-minded. And the teacher says, well, I don't agree. She says, are you claiming to know the truth? Isn't that a bit arrogant and dogmatic to claim to know the truth? And Elizabeth, in her forthright, innocent manner, but very logical manner, says, well, I don't think it's arrogant at all, she says. Rather, I think it's dogmatic as well as arrogant to assert that no single person on earth knows the truth. After all, have you met every person in the world and quizzed them exhaustively? And if not, how can you make such a claim? And also, she says, I believe it is actually the opposite of arrogance to say that I will alter my opinions to fit the truth whenever and wherever I find it. And if I happen to think that I have good reason to believe I do know the truth and would like to share it with you, why wouldn't you listen to me? Why would you automatically discredit my opinion before it's even uttered? I thought we were supposed to listen to everyone's opinion. I like Elizabeth. You listen to Elizabeth, she'll lead you home in a lost third generation. Tolerance once meant listening carefully and respectfully to all points of view. And again, the word tolerance is a concept that's become the anthem of this generation. And that's why I hone in on it now. Because tolerance once meant listening respectfully to all points of view and freely discussing in our common search for truth, ideas and concepts. But the new creed, this third generation's creed, is that knowing the truth is impossible. And Elizabeth didn't buy it. And according to one of my heroes, a guy who God raised up, Chuck Colson, he's now gone on to be with the Lord. He said the classic definition of tolerance is based on judgment. It means putting up with people precisely when we believe they are wrong. It means respecting all viewpoints, but it doesn't stop there, he says. It's driven by the pursuit of truth. That's why we have dialogue. That's why we listen and we read and we grow and we go to church and we engage in the great ideas, because there's truth. And it's worth finding out about it. And we long and crave for truth and goodness and beauty. And tolerance lets us work with a multiple group of people, even multi-ethnic groups of people across global, in global places in our world. Yes, we entertain and we dialogue and we work the ideas. But what we're saying here in the Christian worldview frame of reference is that the Christian idea is a truer idea. It's a more substantiated idea. It has more evidence to back its claims. And yes, tolerance gives people the room to work through their beliefs. It doesn't rigidly point to the rules. And tolerance reaches out, though, with these better ideas. But it doesn't suspend judgment, because we understand that a lot of people's claims are just malarkey. Okay? They don't really have any substance. It's somebody's harebrained idea shooting from the hip. But we're tolerant because we listen to all ideas and we work through them. And tolerance requires practicing moral judgment, not suspending it. It's the wisdom to know which ideas we need to put up with and when and why and to what degree we put up with them. And so tolerance is the settled disposition of acting on that wisdom. Sometimes tolerance is a virtue. It's a virtue that we suspend judgment so as to learn and dialogue and grow. But there's other times that tolerance is not a virtue. In fact, it's criminal when people are being murdered and raped and planes full of civilians are flying into buildings full of innocent people. You don't be tolerant in those situations. This has to stop. It's not a virtue anymore when that happens. We have to act and we have to implement truth claims that will lead us home. Listen, Dorothy Sayers correctly observes how tolerance works. She indicts her age, writing many, many years ago, when she says, in the world it is called tolerance, but in hell it is called despair. The sin that believes in nothing, cares for nothing, seeks to know nothing, enjoys nothing, finds purpose in nothing, lives for nothing, but remains alive because there is nothing which it would die for. And that's the crises of our age. She saw postmodernism before it was ever recognized as a worldview. And this morning I hasten to say that up beside this generation's value of tolerance and this commitment to this blindly accepted opinions that every culture is equivalent, morally equivalent, and everybody's truth claims are morally equivalent. It's a far-fetched idea that has no ability on which to build a worldview or a life. And up against this idea of tolerance, I want to place another concept for you this morning to take away and apply it to your life, and that's the concept of legacy. 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 Le This morning, a new generation within a third generation culture must be raised up to lead. A generation that understands truth. And now we want to make it practical this morning. I want to ask you a question. Are you currently living in such a way that God's values and priorities are getting transferred to the next generation, to your own family? This is real simple. If you go to church once every month or once every 6 months, your kids might end up going maybe twice a year because you've shown them that church really isn't that important. If you minimize biblical teaching or authority, your kids probably won't even bother to read the Bible. If you model a horrible home life, what are the chances of getting the values transferred to the next generation? It's real simple, friends. Do you want your kids doing affairs? Then why are you doing it? You're messing up your legacy. You're messing up the opportunity to, and God's grace is so wonderful, and confession is great, and new life begins in Jesus. Thank God for that. But there's an awful lot of stuff getting in the way of this value transference that we're trying to see happen in the next generations because we've kind of behaved ourselves into these messes. And now what's falling through the cracks is now playing out in a third generation. Who cares? Who cares? God, Jesus, religion, Bible didn't make much difference for my parents. It's not going to make much difference for me. I'll check it and I'll live for tonight. I'm young. And I'll break a few beer bottles and throw my cell phone and get in a few fights because there's nothing else to really live for or die for. Because after all, memorials are dumb. Self-sacrifice is dumb. Friends, this is real simple. Do you want your kids to be angry all the time? Then why are you angry all the time? Do you want your son or daughter to be an alcoholic and drown their problems in drink? Then why are you doing it? Do you want your kids to be sexually active at 12, 13, or 14? Then why don't you talk about it with them personally? And do you want them living a life of entitlement where they never show gratitude and respect to God or country? You never say thank you to God like we're going to do here in a couple of weeks? Then why would we never say the pledge or sing a national anthem or express gratitude to God? We're just going to shore up this belief of entitlement. Everybody owes me. And there's no need to get excited about anything. You see, for us to lead the world right, for us to parent right, for us to see a new generation raised up in this third generation world, this third generation culture, we need a transcendent cause, something that's bigger than us, something that's greater than us, something that has substance to it, something that is true, something that is an absolute on which we can base our life. And Jesus said, I'll be that absolute. I am the way, the truth, and the life. His kingdom is that transcendent cause that we can live for. It's the reason why we rise up and we're heroic, because it's His truth, it's His kingdom that we seek to build and promote within the auspices of a nation who so desperately needs the hand of the Lord in it and upon it. You see, a new generation within a lost third generation must have godly leadership. The people served the Lord all the days of Joshua. They served the Lord all the days of the elders who survived Joshua. And now, after this third generation comes up, it disintegrates. I want to say to you, lead your families. Whatever happens in an election coming up in a couple of days, lead your family with a greater resolve. And what you're going to see, and I'll get into this a little more, is that when you get in the book of Judges, what you find is that male leadership disintegrates to such an extent that actually a woman begins to lead into battle. Because the males are sucking their thumb in the corner and refusing to lead spiritually. You read the book of Judges and you'll see what I'm telling you. Lead your family. I don't care what happens in an election. Lead your family. Love your family. Raise up some heroes from within the auspices of your home and family, and incorporate these values and show them how and why Christianity is true, and model for them the kind of life that will not cast them into these spirals, these ever-increasing spirals of cynicism as to why God and Jesus and the church is just all whatever. Help them to see by your lifestyle, by the values you have, why it is good and right and proper for us to align ourselves with a God who has given us all that we need to rise up and be heroic in a lost third generation culture and age. Experiential knowledge of the Lord, Judges 2:10. And that's a big thing here. And I just want to encourage you guys, especially young people, really set up your own walk with the Lord. In other words, I know mommy and daddy have influence in your life. I know your grandparents had influence in your life. But where are you personally in your walk with God? And what's really intriguing to me is that Joshua or Yehoshua gets translated Yeshua in the New Testament, which translates Jesus. Jesus leads us. He leads an exodus out of the cultural generation of our day. Jesus usurps all other generations, especially the last generation where values have been lost. And now we're in moral freefall. We're doing crazy things in our world, and our family's beginning to feel the brunt of it, and we wonder where are the heroes, and we've castrated them long ago. Friends, this is an emergency. This is the need of the hour for heroes to rise, to show us a way out of the exodus, a way through, out of the bondage, into a new kind of exodus. I'll close with this story. On April 18th, 1775, we're going back a couple hundred years now from that World War II generation. A young boy who worked in a stable in Boston overheard a British officer say something about tomorrow the Americans will pay. That little stable boy took the news, and he went to Boston's North End to the home of a silversmith named Paul Revere. And this was a confirmation of other rumors to this effect that Revere had heard earlier that day. There were a large number of British officers gathering, and all this confirmed that the British were in fact going to march on Lexington and arrest the colonial leaders, especially John Hancock and Samuel Adams, who were freedom fighters, heroes that God was raising up to articulate a new vision of freedom, a new land where God could be honored, people could be free, and that freedom could be sustained. And they were going to take these guys and incarcerate them and march on Lexington. And then they were going to go to the town of Concord, and they were going to seize the stores of guns and ammunition that some of the local colonial militia had stored there. And at 10 p.m., Paul Revere had heard enough. He jumped on his horse, and he began that famous midnight ride. In every town he passed through along the way, he knocked on doors, and he proclaimed, "The British are coming. The British are coming." And being a prominent citizen and a community member, Revere knew whose doors to knock on so the word could spread even faster. He was a fisherman. He was a hunter. He was a card player. He was a theater lover. He frequented pubs and restaurants, and he was a successful businessman. So he knew what doors to knock on in order to transfer the news that the British, they're coming. And all points of the revolution converged in this solitary figure riding in the darkness of night and his connections. It converged in this man, and word spread, and other people caught the vision, and the horse-mounted messengers were dispatched all throughout the communities. And by 5 a.m. on the morning of the 19th, word had spread 40 miles north of Boston. And in the early hours of April 19, 1775, the men on Lexington and Massachusetts began to gather on the town common. And they ranged in age from 16 to 60, and they were carrying muskets and swords and pistols. Farmers were in such haste that they literally left their plows in the field. The British are coming. We've got to do something. I'm so glad they weren't tolerant I'm so glad they had a backbone about them that said, this isn't right. The kinds of things we're being manipulated into, the ideologies that we're being asked to subscribe to, it's not right. We've got to make a stand. And they left their plows in the field, and they hastened to their muskets and swords and pistols, and they got themselves ready as best they could. They had no uniforms for the fight. They were in ordinary clothing, this ragtag bunch of Americans. And when the British began their morning march toward Lexington, the hastily formed militia was getting ready with more on the way. And the British won the first skirmish at the Commons, and 7 American militiamen died that day in that first skirmish. And as the British headed toward Concord, they were met and defeated, and it started what is known as the American Revolution. And this guy had a vision. And in a simple kind of way, this sermon series is about a pastor. It's about a community of believers who, in Paul Revere fashion, is riding through the colonies with a proclamation: the tipping point is coming. The tipping point is coming. The tipping point is coming. Get ready, get ready. Align yourself for battle. The tipping point is coming. Catch the vision of values even of a past age. Not that they had it right on every issue, but again, this moral consensus, this sense of something that guides our lives, this sense of something that we carry with us. Turn back to these principles, rediscover these principles. And Sam Adams, one of the guys that was earmarked for incarceration and capture, after they all signed the Declaration of Independence on July 4th, 1776, he says, "We have this day restored the sovereign to whom all men ought to be obedient. He reigns in heaven, and from the rising to the setting of the sun, let His kingdom come." And patriotism is not a right thing to do, especially when the kingdom principles are embedded within it. Listen, the Continental Congress prayed, and they issued Bibles to soldiers and appointed chaplains for the troops. And General George Washington says, "I don't want you guys just to be soldiers. I want you to be soldiers who are Christian. I want you to have values about you." And even secular Ben Franklin said, "I have lived, sir, a long time, and the longer I live, the more convincing proofs I see of this truth, that God governs in the affairs of men, and if a sparrow cannot fall to the ground without His notice, is it probable that an empire can rise without His aid?" Wow. One of our great patriotic hymns says, and Neil Parks, if you'll come, and we're going to close with your poem today. One of our great patriotic hymns says, "Oh, beautiful for heroes proved in liberating strife, who more than self their country loved, and mercy more than life. America, America," it's a prayer, "may God thy gold refine, till all success be nobleness, and every gain divine." The 56 signers of the Declaration of Independence paid a tremendous price for our freedom. 5 were arrested as traitors. 12 had their homes looted and burned. 17 lost their fortunes. 2 lost sons in the Continental Army. And 9 fought and died during the Revolutionary War. Friends, they paid a price. And what price would you be asked to pay this morning as I call you to this great cause of a new generation that's tucked away in a lost third generation culture? We've got a big decision to make this week. I'll be praying for this, and I want you to be praying for this. There's so much at stake, and really, there's more that I really can't say maybe until after the election, because if I said it, you would deem me as politicizing something. And I don't want to just politicize something. We'll have to let things play out. But listen, make sure that you make your voice heard. Chuck Colson, who became a felon, lost his privilege to vote. He said every election he always got depressed and discouraged because he could not vote. Listen, you can. You can. So make your voice heard. Align it with God's values. And instead of a prayer today, I'm going to have Neil to share with us a reading that I think is the heart cry of a nation.
This selection is called "My Nation, My People." Awake, my nation, and arise from your slumber. You were formed by God's command. His laws were made your laws, his name, printed on your books in money. You say, in God we trust. You have forsaken his ways. Come back, my people, and throw down your walls of ignorance. Come back to the one who formed you. You were created for freedom of religion, not for freedom from the truth. For there is one truth and only one way. All others lead to certain destruction. Rise up, my nation. God cannot be taken forcefully from what he made. If you abandon God, then you forsake what united us from the beginning. You should ask him for guidance, not separate him from our legislation. Don't doom us all by your stupidity. Awake, my people, from your sleep and open your blind eyes. The truth will make himself known. Step from the darkness with open eyes, and you will see our elected leaders have taken us far astray. Come back to him who made us, to him who can save us. Unite us again, O Lord, in common worship of your holy name. For you called us to your side, and we abandoned your guidance for our own. Call us again, dear Lord. Call us again to your side and claim us as your own. Without you, we have become nothing. Redeem us, Lord, I pray.